Lord, as we go into your word, please give us understanding and give us discernment. And may we focus on the things that you would have us focus on. The story itself is captivating and there's so much to get excited about. But let us not miss out on the main point, which is the point that you had the author write about whenever he first put the pen to the paper. Let your spirit guide us into understanding God, because according to our own human wisdom, we are going to miss the point. And let us also figure out how to apply it in our own lives if there is room for application. We love you, God. We praise you. Let us quiet our minds, and may you quiet our minds of any distractions that might keep us from just focusing on the God of glory right here over the course of the next hour or two. We love you. We praise you. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So we are in 2 Samuel chapter 14. And I'm going to summarize some early context briefly, and then I'm going to need y'all's help to summarize chapter 13, because chapters 13, 14, 15, 16, and really going onwards, they are all kind of one extended story, right? They're and really the whole book of 1 and 2 Samuel is, but they're really connected to one another. And so, I'm going to need y'all's help a little bit to recap what happened last week, because really last week's chapter was set up for this week and next week's chapters. And so this week also is kind of set up as well. But it's still really fascinating. The context, to just speak very generally, is that the people of Israel are dwelling in the land of Israel. They are now under a monarchy where they have had one king who was not so great and a second king who is really great, but as of late he hasn't been as great as he once was. Right? And we are talking about David, who is the man after God's own heart, super amazing dude, super great guy, but still a man, and still a faulty man. And we are sadly on kind of the sadder end of David's life, where we just get to see that David is still a man after God's own heart, but he is not quite the guy that he used to be, right? And it's not necessarily that his heart for God isn't the same. It just seems that the sin that he committed with Bathsheba kind of sucked a lot of the vitality out of him, right? Because he realizes like what he's done, and it just changes how he interacts with people. He is no longer the go-get-em, gung-ho young kid facing Goliath and just jumping into the fight. Now he is largely a reactionary figure who seems to be kind of unsure of how to respond to situations because he's probably racked by his own guilt of what he did. Because yes, he's been forgiven by God, but that doesn't change the fact that he has made a major boo-boo, right? He has done some bad stuff. And so that's where we're at in the story, where David committed his sin with Bathsheba in chapter 11, and in chapter 12 he repented and was forgiven by God, but he was also told by God that basically his life was going to be a downward spiral going forwards, and that he was going to have to deal with the consequences of his sin. Not eternally, right? He is forgiven every time. It's always during, I think that's Cody, every time during Bible study. He's not going to have to deal with eternal consequences for his sin because he's been forgiven. But during his life, him and his family are going to go through it. And that's just where we're at. And so really the rest of 2 Samuel is this very sad story of David kind of going through what he went through with Saul. But now, like, whenever he went through it with Saul, there was like kind of this underlying hope to it because we knew that eventually he would come out of it, and also because we knew that he was innocent in all of it. Whereas now he's kind of going through the same stuff, and we know that eventually, like, he's just going to die. But then also he bears a little bit of responsibility in what's going on, and so it just kind of makes it a little bit sadder when you're going through it. But there's still a lot we can learn from it. And I still want to remind us that David, throughout history, still goes down as a man after God's own heart. And he is still, like, going forward in the Bible, he is always the gold standard by which the kings of Israel are compared to until Jesus shows up. That is why whenever Jesus shows up, they call him the Son of David. That is what the people were expecting. Despite all of David's flaws, he goes down in history as a remarkable man. And I just want that to encourage us, because you can look at this and some of the stuff you're going to be like, dang, David, like, get your act together. But the cool thing is that history has been kind to David. Some people, not so much. But despite all of David's flaws, we remember him for his strengths, which I just think is really, really cool. And I just appreciate that just when it comes to the testimony of Scripture, that it's telling a true story. It doesn't try to whitewash who David was, right? Because that's usually how a lot of the history books go. right? They take their leaders and they paint them in like the most majestic way possible. Whereas this is really good evidence for the Bible just telling a true story. This is their most famous king, their golden child. Yeah, it tells the truth and it shows that he was not perfect, which I just think is really cool because it's more likely that it's telling the truth, which is good for us as Christians because we want the Bible to be telling the truth. So, the sin with Bathsheba thing was chapters 11 and 12, but last week we covered the aftermath of that. And this could be taking place years, if not decades afterwards. Some people speculate this is actually at the end of David's reign and that really the rest of this story takes place in 1 year. I don't know if that's true or not. But can somebody kind of recap for me what we saw in chapter 13? There's kind of two halves to the story.
Amnon, he rapes his sister.
Yes. So first off, who is Amnon?
The son of David.
Yeah, he's the eldest son of David. And he is infatuated with his half-sister Tamar, who happens to be the sister of Absalom, right? Who Absalom, as far as we know, is the third-born son of David. There is another son in between there, but we don't really hear anything about him in the Bible, so maybe he died young, or maybe he just was never a significant figure. You always wonder, like, those characters who show up in the Bible like one time, but then they're never mentioned again. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because like they didn't do anything significant, but they also didn't do anything bad enough to be mentioned either. But yeah, so Amnon, he is infatuated with his sister, which is weird. And
seems like he resists, but he still he goes with it. You know?
Well, no, he basically fakes an illness, and eventually works it out to where him and her are alone together in a room, and then he sleeps with her, and he forces himself upon her, and it's tragic. And what does David do in response to this?
Just gets angry.
He just gets angry. Yeah, he doesn't do anything. And we speculated as to why maybe he responded that way. We don't know. It could be that out of guilt, he looks and he's like, well, hey, I did this same thing, right? I sinned with Bathsheba, and who am I to get on to my son? And the answer to that would be, you're his father. And even if you messed up, you know what? Maybe that's a reason to get onto it. Son, I did this same thing, and I don't want you to follow in my footsteps. So, but David doesn't do anything, right? Which kind of just continues the trend that we've seen in 1st and 2nd Samuel, that there's really not a lot of good fathers in this story, which is heartbreaking and convicting. It shows that discipleship is a genuinely difficult task, even when you're a man after God's own heart. And so he doesn't do anything, but that's not the end of Amnon's story, is it?
No.
What happens at the back half of chapter 13?
2 years later, Absalom kills Amnon.
Yeah, so Absalom, once again, is the
runs.
brother of Tamar,
Runs away.
the third born of David. And Absalom has heard about this, but he's been very restrained, and he's been holding himself back. And eventually, he kind of works this whole thing out to where David sends Amnon on a journey to go basically party with Absalom. And all of David's sons. It's interesting, we also, I don't know if we emphasized this last week or not, but David is the middleman in both scenarios. With Amnon and Tamar, David is the one who eventually sends Tamar to go visit Amnon. And then, in the second part, David is the one who sends Amnon to go visit Absalom. And so David unwittingly helps his sons commit these grievous sins. Unbeknownst to him, though, right? So technically, he is innocent there. It's not like he had any idea what was going on. But it's just interesting how even that guilt probably is with him. Because even though he doesn't actually bear any guilt, you would still feel like you did. But Amnon goes to visit Absalom, and what does Absalom do?
He kills him.
He kills his brother.
And runs away.
To
to another kingdom.
Yes. He actually goes, and we didn't talk about this last week, and that's mainly because I forgot this detail, but the person he goes to visit is his grandfather. Yeah. Who was...
Geshur.
Yes, he's not an Israelite, but he does go to visit his grandfather, and that's where he stays at. It's the...
Oh, would that be his mom's dad then?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And so Absalom flees, and that is where we are currently at, right? Absalom has fled. David is mad about it. But then what did we read at the very end of chapter 13?
The heart of King David longed to go out to Absalom, for he was comforted concerning Amnon, since he was dead. Oh, he was happy that Amnon was dead?
he wasn't happy, but I think the idea is that time passed and David's frustration didn't go away, but it calmed down a little bit. And we're going to see that it's not entirely gone, because that's really the entire conflict of this chapter right here. I called it Absalom returns to Jerusalem, but really what I could call it is that the conflict between David and Absalom solidifies. Because David seems kind of torn here, because he does love his son, but his son did a horrible thing. Right? Literally, he had a son kill another son. Like, that is unspeakable stuff. And so, it seems like over time, David is comforted over the fact that Amnon is dead, and he probably begins to empathize with what Absalom did, and he can understand why Absalom did it. And so, eventually, he kind of wants to see his son again, but at the same time, what Absalom did is terrible. And so, David's kind of between a rock and a hard place here. And that is really that conflict right there. David's internal conflict over this is going to be the driving factor of this chapter, and ultimately the driving factor of Absalom's rebellion in the chapters to come. Because David's not... you can understand why David handles it the way he does, but it's not going to probably be the best. Right? And if anything, just to tell you right off the bat, the best application we could probably come out of this chapter with, it has to do with forgiveness. Because that is where David is going to falter here. And he has good reasons for faltering, but that doesn't justify it, if that makes sense. Right. Could you unlock the door for Eric? All right. And since I just told Sean to go unlock the door, guess I'm reading the slide today. All right. Now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, knew that the king's heart went out to Absalom. And Joab sent to Tekoa and brought from there a wise woman and said to her, "Pretend to be a mourner and put on mourning garments. Do not anoint yourself with oil, but behave like a woman who has been mourning many days for the dead. Go to the king and speak thus to him." So Joab put the words in her mouth. When the woman of Tekoa came to the king, she fell on her face to the ground and paid homage and said, "Save me, O king." And the king said to her, "What is your trouble?" She answered, "Alas, I am a widow. My husband is dead. And your servant had 2 sons, and they quarreled with one another in the field. There was no one to separate them, and one struck the other and killed him. And now the whole clan has risen against your servant, and they say, 'Give up the man who struck his brother, that we may put him to death for the life of his brother whom he killed.' And so they would destroy the heir also. Thus they would quench my coal that is left, and leave to my husband neither name nor remnant on the face of the earth." All right. So, right off the bat, what are some things that stick out to y'all?
Who is Joab?
Who is Joab?
Like a servant of David, like a king's servant.
Kinda. Rocky?
He's David's sister's son.
Which is easier term?
Nephew.
Joab's son. No, that's good. So it's Zeruiah is David's sister, older sister, and then Joab is her son. So this is David's nephew, but even more importantly, what role does he play?
He's the commander.
Yes, he is David's commander. Joab is to David what Abner was to Saul, and what Abner also was to Ishbosheth. Right? Okay, so we have Joab. What are some other things that stick out to y'all?
He tells the lady to lie. Well, I guess that's not really the point. It's just...
Yeah. If anything, he's hiring an actress.
He makes her... She goes to make David think. Well,
yes.
We'll find that out in a second. But.
Yeah. Rocky?
It says do not anoint yourself with oil. Is it like a sin to anoint yourself with oil and then lie or something?
It's not about that. I think the idea of anointing yourself with oil, it's like putting perfume on or something, right? He wants the woman to go in and look disheveled, right? So I don't want you to don't make yourself look all pretty. You need to go in there and you need to look rough. You need to look like you're going through something.
Put on mourning garments.
Yes. Yeah, so he wants her to go in there and look like she hasn't bathed in a few days and that she's been really grieving. That's the point here. It really is, he's hiring an actress. That's kind of what's going on here. So let's just walk through it. Before we even get there, so let's go back a few chapters and let's remember the last time David wasn't in the best state of mind. How was it that somebody got his attention?
Oh, they did the same thing, didn't they?
Something kind of similar.
They told a story that was similar to a situation.
Yes! Right? This is exactly what happened whenever David had sinned with Bathsheba, and Nathan comes in and confronts David. right? He tells a story. I love this because this just kind of lets us know how David works. Everybody knows that if you can tell David a good story, you'll get his attention. And apparently they know that David is very empathetic, right? He has empathy for people. He cares for people deeply, which makes sense. He's a man after God's own heart, right? And so whenever Nathan came in and confronted David, he didn't just say, hey, you sinned with that woman. So, no. Instead he said, there was a rich man and a poor lamb. And the rich man stole the poor man's lamb. What do we do? And David, the man after God's own heart, he's captivated by the story. And he says, oh, this is unacceptable. That rich man deserves to be killed. And Nathan's like, oh, well, you're the man.
You are the man.
Yeah. But this is what, it seems like this is what people understand about David, right? If you can tell him a good story, he will give you good judgment, right? Because he is a good king.
And like separate himself from the situation. He doesn't realize that's what he's doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, this is also his role as a king. If there were different disputes and stuff that were taken before the city judges, and the people didn't agree with how the city judges ruled, or if they thought it was questionable, they could get permission to go to the king and present the issue before him. This is actually something that dates way back to the Torah, right? Remember whenever Moses and them had gotten out of Israel, and it says that his father-in-law visited him, and he sees Moses there all day answering people's questions. And Jethro, his father-in-law, is like, hey Moses, this is too exhausting for you. You can't bear this burden alone. He says, appoint some people under you, and they can answer these small problems, and then the bigger problems can come to you. And it seems like that followed on to here. And so that's kind of what Nathan was doing, and that's also what Joab's doing here as well, right? Except Joab's doing it through this woman, so it seems like an actual scenario. David does not know this woman's an actress, right? And so Joab, the son of Zeruiah, knew that the king's heart went out to Absalom. This is one of those places where, once again, the chapter break makes things kind of wonky, because it immediately flows from the previous chapter. And so Joab hears that David kind of is interested in the idea of seeing Absalom again. So Joab sent to Tekoa and brought from there a wise woman and said to her, pretend to be a mourner and put on mourning garments. Do not anoint yourself with oil, but behave like a woman who has been mourning many days for the dead. Go to the king and speak thus to him. So Joab put the words in her mouth. We'll talk about the instructions in a second, but first off, let's just ask the question, what do you think Joab's end goal is here? Why is he doing this?
Get the king and his son back together.
Okay. Why would he want to do that?
It's good that the king would have his heir nearby.
Yeah. So there's just that practical benefit, right? Joab, we know this. Joab's a cunning guy. He's very wise. He's politically savvy. He probably recognizes that it is not necessarily healthy for the king and one of his next in line for the throne, potentially. We believe that Solomon was kind of appointed by God to be the next heir, but we don't know how common knowledge that was or anything. And so if Amnon's out of the picture, Absalom is one of, if not the next in line. It's probably not best for the king and one of his heirs to be brooding in conflict with one another, right? And so Joab probably sees, like, you know what? It's probably good for these guys to reunite in some way. That'd probably be helpful. What else might he be motivated by?
If he sees maybe that, like, David's kind of distracted by the idea that, like, Absalom is gone, he knows that, like, David isn't going to help him in the battlefield or, like, help him in other things, and so he's like, okay, we need to, like, handle this Absalom thing, make sure he comes home so that, like, David can help me doing, like, more, like, tactical things when it comes to the kingdom.
Yeah, there might be a lot of practical benefit to it. Yeah, we do know that about Joab. He usually doesn't do stuff unless he has something to gain out of it, because that's just the type of guy he is, and that's, to be honest, how most of us are. But there's that as well. David might just be distracted by this whole thing. But also, one thing we can say about Joab, he's got a lot of character flaws, but one thing about him is that he is fiercely loyal to David. He's just a loyal guy. Like, he loves David. To the point where he's willing to have Uriah killed to protect David's secret, right? So Joab's loyal. But Joab does sometimes have some scheming in the background. So some people speculate that maybe this is his way of kind of sucking up to Absalom. Because maybe he's like, hey, well, if Absalom might be in charge next, and David's kind of getting a little bit old, and his kingdom's kind of falling apart, maybe I should play a role in this. And we're going to see, not only here, but also whenever you get to, like, the beginning of 1 Kings and stuff, that In many ways, Joab does kind of what Abner did, and he likes being a kingmaker, right? So remember after Saul died, Abner went and took Ishbosheth and put him on the throne? That's kind of the mentality that Joab adopts. But we're going to see that Joab and Absalom's relationship is going to fall apart pretty quickly in this chapter alone. But there's various different reasons why Joab could go about this, but some of it could just be loyalty to David, right? He's like, hey, David, I think it's for your best interest that you and your son reconcile. There's probably other things. Knowing Joab, I can guarantee you there's other reasons as well. Probably more self-serving things, but to be as generous as possible, let's just say he's serving the king, like a good commander should. So what does he tell the woman?
Look like you're mourning and say this stuff.
Yeah, look like you're mourning and say these things, right? Pretend to be a mourner, put on mourning garments, do not anoint yourself with oil, but behave like a woman who has been mourning for many days for the dead, right? So he hires her to appear like a grieving woman. Go to the king and speak thus to him. What is she supposed to speak? We'll probably just wait and you'll just see what she says, and that's what Joab says. So Joab comes with this whole scheme. I love it, right? He's going really above and beyond. He probably could just come up to David and do what Nathan did and just present the case to David. But Joab knows David, and he knows that David loves people, and if he sees a grieving woman coming to him with a problem, David's probably going to respond in a much more loving and gracious way than if his battle-hardened commander presents the same issue. Does that make sense? So he's like, let me just really sell this. So he goes and hires this woman and says, go do this, and he put the words in her mouth, and now we're going to see what she says. When the woman of Tekoa came to the king, Tekoa is just a city, by the way. You probably picked up on that, but it's worth pointing out. I believe the prophet Amos is from Tekoa, I think. When the woman of Tekoa came to the king, she fell on her face to the ground and paid homage and said, "Save me, O king." Right off the bat, this probably has David's attention, right? I mean, you've got this grieving woman on her face, and what does she ask him to do? Save me. You know, I'd be interested to look this up. I wonder what the Hebrew is there, because save me, I wonder if it's like Hosanna. But I'm just going to look it up real quick. Give me a second. 2 Samuel chapter 14, verse 4. Boom. 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 Let's see. Face to the ground and said, oh, it's Yasa. So it's the word where Jesus comes from, Yeshua, right? But because Yeshua, Jesus means salvation. But I just wanted to look that up because whenever they cried out Hosanna to Jesus, it was save us, Okay, so she falls down and she says, "Save me, O king." And the king says to her, "What is your trouble? What's going on? What's happening here?" And she answers, "Alas, I am a widow, my husband is dead, and your servant had 2 sons, and they quarreled with one another in the field. There was no one to separate them, and one struck the other and killed him." So what happened?
Somebody killed somebody else.
Yeah, specifically, who killed who?
Brother.
2 brothers. What does this story sound kind of like?
Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel, right? One brother takes another brother out into the field. He strikes him and kills him. Before we even move on here, how did the Cain and Abel story end? Cain is cursed, but that's not all that happens to him. Remember, Cain and God have a conversation. And is Cain killed for what he did? No. He should be, though. Instead, what does God do for him?
Puts a mark on him so no one will touch him.
Yeah. Instead, God, in his mercy, offers protection to Cain. Right? So, if you just keep in mind, this sounds a lot like the Cain and Abel story, and if David knows the Cain and Abel story, you're like, oh, I think I get what this woman's asking for. Right? And that's exactly what she's going to ask for. She's saying, my son deserves to die because he killed his brother, but it'd be really great if you did what God did, and rather than dispensing justice, you dispensed mercy and actually protected the murderous brother. So that's one of those cool things where it's cool. It's good to know the stories of the Bible because you read the phrases and you're like, brother takes brother into field, kills brother. That sounds like Cain and Abel. Oh, okay. I see where she's heading. So she says she's a widow. Her husband is dead, right? So she can't have any more children. She's probably past childbearing age. especially if her kids are grown enough to be engaging in this type of tomfoolery. Your servant had 2 sons. They quarreled with one another, and and they quarreled with one another in the field. There was no one to separate them, so they were off on their own. No one stopped them. If anything, that might be a slight indictment against the king. If you realize she's talking about Absalom and Amnon, right? Where were you to stop them, right? You were over here in Jerusalem. You sent them over there. Nobody pulled them apart. I don't think that's what she's going for, but if the shoe fits. There was no one there to separate them, and one struck the other and killed him. And now the whole clan has risen against your servant. And they say, give up the man. So the whole clan has risen against who? Your servant. Who's she referring to?
Her.
Herself, right? So now everybody's looking at her, and what are they asking her to do?
Give him up. The killer.
Yeah, give us your son, because we need to put him to death for the brother that he killed. Is this lawful?
It's lawful, but it's not. Oh, sorry, Brand.
What's that?
It's eye for eye.
Yeah, this is exactly what the law demands, right? The law actually made provision for stuff like this,
Capital
right?
punishment.
Yeah, capital punishment. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, life for life. There was a thing in the old, like if you look at the Mosaic law, where if somebody slaughtered another person, they could flee to a city called a city of refuge, and they could wait there until there was an official trial. Right? But that wasn't to say, like, that was just to keep the avenger of blood from just, like, murdering them on the spot. There needed to be trial, but he killed somebody. And so, in a trial, this guy would be convicted of murder, and he would be put to death. Right? So that is the just penalty, and that's what these people are asking of her. Right? They're coming to the woman, and they're saying, give us your older son, because we need to punish him for what he did to his younger brother. And that is lawful. However, she doesn't stop her story there, does she? Because she's not going to ask David to do the lawful thing. She's not going to ask him to do the just thing. She's going to ask him to do the gracious thing. And so they would destroy the heir also. Just right off the bat, just right there, notice how she frames it. How is she putting this?
Both my sons will die.
Both my sons will die. Do you notice that she doesn't voice any animosity towards the son who killed the brother? Does that mean that he's not guilty? No. It just means that she's trying to not focus on that part. Because she doesn't want David to focus on that. Right? Because the point is to focus on forgiveness, not to focus on the grievance. The issue with this, and this is also an issue we're going to see here, is that there's never a point where Absalom actually repents. Right? And so the forgiveness is like that's where David's put between a rock and a hard place. Because what the woman is saying sounds great, but if you're not careful, it is a perversion of justice. Right? Because if there was a change of heart, you could see why this graciousness might be allowed for. But for right now, we're overlooking that. Right? Because her goal, given her by Joab, was get the king to forgive Absalom.
Oh, yeah.
So she was that?
If there's not a change of heart, then you're just letting a murderer who might murder again go free.
Yeah, they're just letting them go free, right? They're not actually learning from their mistakes. And that's the issue that David is facing. And that's why I'm saying it's not an easy issue. And so she points out not that this man deserves to die, which he does. I think that's kind of understood because he killed his brother. She doesn't need to point that out. But she's pointing out that in this case, I will have lost not one child, but 2. And that is actually a greater argument than saying, oh, he needs to be forgiven. No, he doesn't deserve forgiveness. She's saying, think about me. I'm a widow. If I lose both sons, I have nothing. Right? Like, she has no one to protect her. As she's going to point out, her husband's line dies off. Like, she has nothing. And so, it was, sure, what he did was bad. But the greater evil would be to also take the other son. Because now, your thirst for justice has afflicted somebody else. Right? And so, it's a very clever argument that she's going for here. And you can see why it would sway David's heart. Yes, Rocky?
It kind of reminds me of the Ruth story a little bit.
It does a little bit. Yeah, it's the same, because they're living in the same type of culture. Right? This is just a few generations later. Same mentality. And so she's saying, what, they're going to kill the heir too? Then I've lost not one son, but 2? Because one son decided to do an evil thing. Now I've lost both sons. Which, once again, Cain and Abel, that's exactly what happened. Right? Cain killed Abel. Eve lost both of her children. right? Because Abel died and Cain was banished, right? But that's not the part of the Cain and Abel story we want you to remember. We want to remember the protection offered to the older son. Thus they would quench my coal that is left. Other translations say that they will destroy the embers that are left. What is the imagery there?
Fire's put out.
Yeah, the fire's put out. It's a very poetic way of saying that's the only hope I have left. This is my child. My husband's dead. One of my children's dead. All I have left is this one child. Right? And you can see how this would tug at David's heartstrings. Right? She's like, my fire is already almost out, and they would take away that coal as well. They would just destroy the fire. They would quench my coal that is left and leave to my husband neither name nor remnant on the face of the earth. They're so hungry for justice, and they're so unwilling to forgive that they would totally destroy my life and take away my husband's ability to have a family name going on. You can see how this totally reframes the whole thing, right? And you see that this is a complicated scenario because there's really not an easy solution. Because we've already pointed out, if you just forgive the guy and there's no repentance, you might just be freeing a murderer to go continue murdering. However, if you don't, then you're really kind of screwing this woman over. And the question is, man, what is the correct answer? And so I don't know if David's going to make the right one, but we've got to understand this is a very difficult thing. So let's move on. Sean, take it away.
Then the king said to the woman, "Go to your house, and I will give orders concerning you." And the woman of Tekoa said to the king, "On me be the guilt, my lord the king, and on my father's house. Let the king and his throne be guiltless." The king said, "If anyone says anything to you, bring him to me, and he shall never touch you again." Then she said, "Please let the king invoke the Lord your God, that the avenger of blood kill no more, and my son be not destroyed." He said, "As the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground." Then the woman said, "Please let your servant speak a word to my lord the king." He said, "Speak." And the woman said, "Why then have you planned such a thing against the people of God? For in giving this decision, the king convicts himself, inasmuch as the king does not bring his banished one home again. We must all die. We are like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. But God will not take away life, and he devises means so that the banished one will not remain an outcast. Now I have come to say this to my lord the king, because the people have made me afraid." And your servant thought, "I will speak to the king. It may be that the king will perform the request of his servant. For the king will hear and deliver his servant from the hand of the man who would destroy me, and my son together from the heritage of God." And your servant thought, "The word of my lord the king will set me at rest. For my lord the king is like an angel of God to discern good and evil. The Lord your God be with you."
All right. The plot thickens. What sticks out to y'all here?
She says, "Well, this is your situation."
Yeah, she's like, "Thanks for the answer. Now, you're the man." Once again, kind of what Nathan did. This is your situation, David.
And it would hurt us as the people.
Yes, which is once again another convincing argument to sway David, right? Think about the effect that this conflict between you and your son is having on the people of Israel as a whole, right? It's splitting the nation, which is against what David wants. All right, let's walk through it. So, the woman has presented her case. She has told David her story, and now she awaits David's judgment. Right? Let's see what the wise king will say. Then the king said to the woman, "Go to your house, and I will give orders concerning you." What does he say? There's going to be multiple back and forth interactions.
He needs time to think pretty much.
What's that?
He wants time to think pretty much.
Yeah, he's give me time to think about this. Right? And I believe David is a man of his word, so it's not like he's just brushing her off and he's going to forget about it. I think he does want to think about this. He's like, ooh, I think he realizes this is a very complex scenario that he needs to think through. And he says, "You go home, and in time, I'll figure out what I want to do here." However, she doesn't want to allow him to have time to think, does she? Because once again, it's a complicated scenario. And if you think about it too long, you might end up on the side she doesn't want him to be on. But right now she has his attention. Right? Right now she has his empathy. Right now she's got him thinking in a very gracious manner, which is good. Right? But she's going to push him. And she's like, no, I want a decision now. Right? So he says, go to your house, I'll give orders concerning you. And the woman of Tekoa said to the king, on me be the guilt, my lord the king, and on my father's house. Let the king and his throne be guiltless. So how does she respond?
She takes the blame.
Yeah, for what?
One of her sons killing the other.
Right.
Yeah, so in many ways, maybe it's like, put the blame of my son's debt on me. Don't put that blame on you. But also, I think this could be, bless you, I think this could be her suggesting like, hey, if you make the wrong choice, I'll bear the blame for that, but don't allow your overthinking to put any guilt on you. Right? It's like she's really just trying to pressure him like, hey, like, I don't want you to overthink this and complicate it to where you end up bearing any guilt in any of this. Go with your gut reaction, because you're a good, righteous king, and I know that your gut reaction is, that's going to be the right thing. And if I'm wrong, then I'll just bear the guilt, I guess, for that, though. It can kind of go both ways, depending on just how you look at it. The main thing is that she's pushing him, right? No, don't wait until I go home. Just tell me now. I'll bear the guilt for it. Just please give me a verdict now, please, preferably. The king said, if anyone says anything to you, bring him to me, and he shall never touch you again. Okay, how does he respond?
I will protect you.
Yes, I will protect you, the woman. Right? Who does he not say that he's protecting yet? The son.
Her son.
So he's still, like, I appreciate what David's doing here, because you can see that he is trying to be very careful in his words. Right? And so he's using, like, you can tell he's being thoughtful. And even what he's saying, he's like, okay, if people keep bothering you about this, because the whole thing is she said that she feels unsafe because everybody's getting onto her saying, like, release your son. He says, if anybody threatens you, you come talk to me. This is kind of like whenever my students, my junior hires usually, during PE and stuff, like they'll like start getting in little fights and stuff. I actually had to break up my very first fight a few days ago. It was awesome. But they'll start getting in each other's face and stuff, or they'll just do certain things, and they're like, well, Mr. Tate, how would you have me react? And I say, if they do anything to you, just come talk to me. I will handle it. Your reaction should not be to lash back out. That's kind of like what David's saying here, right? He's saying, guys, or he says to her, if these guys keep bothering you, come talk to me and I'll handle it. Right? That's what David's doing here. However, it still doesn't give her what she wants. But it tells her that she's got him right where she wants him. Right? Because you can tell that he is empathizing with her. And he cares for her deeply. And he really wants to protect this woman as much as possible. Right? And so, yes, he hasn't given her the answer, but she knows that she's right there. Right? He's like, he's almost there. If anyone does anything to you, bring him to me. He shall never touch you again. But he hasn't said, they'll never touch your son. That's what she needs, because this isn't just about her. It's about the son, because it's really about David and Absalom. Then she said, please let the king invoke the Lord your God, that the avenger of blood kill no more, and my son be not destroyed. Avenger of blood, that's once again a reference to the thing in the Old Testament, like the in the Torah, where they would chase the person to the city of refuge. The avenger of blood is literally the one who, takes vengeance for the blood that was spilt, right? The person who would kill the brother. And so what is she asking David to do?
Protect her son so he doesn't get killed.
Yeah, and she doesn't just say, protect my son. She says, swear in the name of God, right? Please let the king invoke Yahweh your God. Right? Like, put your hand on the Bible, basically. Like, tell me that I can be guaranteed that my son will not die. So you can see her persistence. And once again, David does not know this woman's an actress. As far as he knows, this is a legit scenario, and he's learning something here because he sees this woman who is so consumed by love for her son that she is willing to overlook his evil just because she wants to be with him again. Which is what she wants him to view himself as, right? So, like, he's looking at this and he is learning a lesson. And he's seeing this woman who's not even thinking about how bad her son is. All she can think about is how precious he is to her. And so she says, please, I know it's not about me. Like, he's already offered to protect her, which probably would go to include, even if your son gets killed, I'll protect you. Like, I'll take care of you. Because David's that type of guy. But she says, that's not it. This is my son. Please promise me that nobody will harm my son. And don't just promise me, swear it in the name of God. She's got it right where she wants him. He said, as Yahweh lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. So what does he promise?
Protection for her son.
I've got you. What you've asked, you'll receive. Your son will overlook it. What he did was horrible, but we'll be gracious to him for your sake. Because you care so deeply for your son. Not one hair. Like, this is total protection, right? Not one hair. Notice the emphasis on hair, though. Just because hair is going to become a very prominent thing as we get into the story of Absalom. So just keep that in mind. So, he promises her the protection. Joab's plan has worked. Then the woman said, please let your servant speak a word to my lord the king. And he says, speak. So, what is she saying now?
I'd like to give you some more.
Thank you, sir. Now, if I may, can I speak a little bluntly? Right, that's kind of what she's asking. I know that I've already kept up so much of your time, but let me talk a little bit longer, and I'm going to speak straightforward if you'll give me the honor. And he says, go for it, absolutely. David's the type of dude, say whatever you want to say to me. And the woman says, probably not what David was expecting. He was probably expecting her to be like, thank you so much, you're so great, I love you. This is where she just pulls a Nathan and says, you're the man. And the woman said, why then have you planned such a thing against the people of God? For in giving this decision, the king convicts himself, inasmuch as the king does not bring his banished one home again. So what does she say?
If that's how you feel about this situation, why not just bring your son? It's not here.
Yeah. She was like, David, we just had like a 5-minute conversation and I was able to convince you to free a murderer just so he could take care of his mom. You've been spending years unwilling to forgive your own child. You're convicting yourself because whenever I pushed you, you knew this was the right decision to make. And once again, the question is that the right decision? It goes both ways, right? It could be, like, this is a difficult decision to make. A lot of the commentaries I read on it, they try to make it seem like it's a very clear black and white thing. I'm not sure it is, right? And that's because David's doing the gracious thing, which is good, but he's also letting this murderer go free, right? And so that it is a very morally complex decision to make. But she says, David, you've convicted yourself. You were willing to forgive my son of an evil, and you don't even know my son. You don't even know me. You didn't even meet me until today. You don't even know the fact that I'm an actress, right? But your own son, whom you raised, whom you love, you won't forgive him? And notice, she says, why then have you planned such a thing against the people of God? So who is the widow in the story? The people of Israel, right? They're the widow. They're the ones who are truly suffering if David does not forgive Absalom, right? That's really her point. Her point is not, David, look what you're doing to yourself. It's saying, David, look what you're doing to your kingdom, right? If you allow this animosity to extend itself, your kingdom will rip itself apart, which is technically true. And that's why, once again, I highlight the moral complexity of this. Because of this tension between David and Absalom, the kingdom is going to be ripped apart in many ways. And we're going to see that. And so what she's saying has elements of truth to it. For in giving this decision, the king convicts himself inasmuch as the king does not bring his banished one home again. Right? You should bring your banished one back home. You should never just give up on people. Right? This is, Brianna and I have been watching Smallville, which is all about Superman. And this is one of the big things that I love about Superman, is that he's always willing to give people a second chance, and all because somebody is lost doesn't mean that they're lost forever, right? He wants to bring the banished person back home. And that's, I think, the reason I like that about Superman is because that's who our God is, right? And that's what she's about to highlight about God. We must all die. We are like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. You see how this, once again, sounds very similar to what David said after his sin with Bathsheba? Remember whenever he said that his son had died? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. Right? She says, this is one way this goes. We're all heading towards death. And we're like water being poured out. We're not going to be regathered again. What matters is the life that we're living right now. Right? Do you want to go to the grave not forgiving your son? Do you want to be that? Is that the spilt water that you want to pour out? Or do you want to, whenever your water is poured out, it pours out just a cup of forgiveness? What type of person do you want to be, David? But God will not take away life, and he devises means so that the banished one will not remain an outcast. Well, heck, now it does seem like her decision's correct. Because what did she just kind of summarize? Probably unknowingly. God devises means so that the banished one will not remain an outcast?
Like the gospel.
That's the gospel. Yeah. God comes up with some way to make it so that the banished person does not have to stay banished anymore. Bless you. Right? Like this is why we're Christians. Because God, we were banished. We were exiled from Eden. Yet God found a way to make it work. And I think that is where we do see that maybe this was the right decision to do. The issue is that David doesn't go all the way and find a correct way. Right? David is just going to go through the motions of forgiveness, but it's not going to be genuine forgiveness. That's the issue. God, he found a way. Because you can't just be gracious. There has to be punishment. There has to be sacrifice. And God decided to take the punishment upon himself. David could have made that choice. But instead, David is going to extend a hand out to Absalom and invite Absalom back, but he's still going to hold the thing against Absalom. And that's going to be the thing that breaks things apart. Right? Because Absalom's not going to repent. David's not going to take the sacrifice upon himself. And so that animosity is still going to be there, and it's just going to be empty forgiveness. It's going to be the motions of reconciliation, but not genuine reconciliation. But her point here is good. Right? This is who our God is. And you, man after God's own heart, know that. Because you recognize that God makes a way to retrieve the banished ones. And he likes restoring relationships. Now I have come to say this to my Lord, the king, because the people have made me afraid. And your servant thought, I will speak to the king. It may be that the king will perform the request of his servant. For the king will hear and deliver his servant from the hand of the man who would destroy me, and my son together from the heritage of God. So she's still playing all of the lines of this is her story. And she says, the reason I came to you is because I knew that you had good judgment. And I knew you would do the right thing for me. I'm just so confused as to why you're not doing the same thing in your own life. You have the wisdom. You know what God would have you do. But you're telling me to do it, but you're not doing it yourself. This is why she had to ask to speak plainly, because do you know what she is calling David?
A hypocrite.
A hypocrite. Yes. That is exactly what she's calling David, and you don't call a king a hypocrite without asking to speak bluntly first. She says, David, I need to speak bluntly. You're acting kind of hypocritical, because I appreciate what you're willing to do for me and my son. But what about you? And what about Absalom? What about the son of Israel? Right? Everybody loves Absalom, and you're willing to leave him banished? Come on, David. And your servant thought, the word of my lord the king will set me at rest. For my lord the king is like the angel of God. Right? The messenger of God. That's where the word angel just means messenger. I kind of wish we would just translate it as messenger, because sometimes it can be kind of confusing. Angel is not a type of being. It is a role. It is a function, right? I am not a teacher by nature. I am a human who teaches, right? An angel there can be divine angels, there can be human angels. It's just a messenger, right? And she says, you are like the messenger of God. AKA, when you speak, it is as if God were speaking. That is how much she trusts David's judgment. And she says, man, I came here knowing that I would not be able to leave without being at total rest about my situation, because that's how good your judgment is. And she's kind of saying, I do feel at rest about my situation, but now I don't feel any rest about your situation. Because your judgment has told me that you are in the wrong. And then she departs. The Lord your God be with you. It's like, anyways, after that conversation, see ya. She's not actually going to depart quite yet. They're still going to talk a little bit more. But I just think that's really funny. She's like, hey, David, king, can I speak bluntly? He's like, sure. She's like, you're kind of acting like a hypocrite. Anyways, I hope God's with you. It's just really funny to me. All right, moving on. Take it away, Sean. Let's just do verses 18 through 20 first.
Okay. Then the king answered the woman, do not hide from me anything I ask you. And the woman said, let my lord the king speak. The king said, is the hand of Joab with you in all this? The woman answered and said, as surely as you live, my lord the king, one cannot turn to the right hand or to the left from anything that my lord the king has said. It was your servant Joab who commanded me. It was he who put all these words in the mouth of your servant. In order to change the course of things, your servant Joab did this. But my Lord has wisdom like the wisdom of the angel of God to know all things that are on the earth.
All right, so I think what she's saying is true, but also at the same time, I can't help but notice the fact that all of a sudden, once he calls her out on her stuff, she just starts sucking up to him like crazy. Like, she was already saying some complimentary stuff before, but all of a sudden he's like, hey, are you by chance an actress? Did my nephew hire you? And she's like, did I mention how awesome you are? Like, you're just great. Like, you are, wow. Yep, you're good. It's just really funny to me that, like, she's like, I just called the king a hypocrite, and he figured out that I'm a hired actress. Like, you just imagine her nervously sweating. Yeah, what do y'all think about this interaction?
Dave's pretty smart. He figured it out.
Right?
Yeah.
I think this is great.
Yeah. And like the last chapter, he didn't figure out what the other two were going to do. He figured it out this.
Yeah,
That's
and,
third time's the charm.
yeah, and that's what I'm saying about David here, is that you see little hints and glimmers of the former guy he was, but still by and large, like, he's just not the same guy. And that's probably because he's gotten older and he finds himself in a weird scenario and now everything's a lot more gray, right? Whenever he was a young boy showing up to fight a Philistine, it was very black and white. That man, bad. He's mean to God's people. I am God's people. I fight bad men, right? That was easy. Now he's in this scenario where it's like, so David, should we follow in God's graciousness and forgive a murderer? Or should we follow in God's justice and kill the murderer? And it's like, justice, graciousness, I don't know. And like, so he's just in a very difficult scenario. And so, yeah, but like Rocky pointed out, brilliant, right? He perceives it. But it's also kind of funny because we saw something very similar to this in the last chapter. Do you remember?
You with Absalom and Tamar?
Yeah. To where it was, who was it who... Oh, no, yeah, it was Absalom. Whenever Tamar showed up all disheveled and stuff, and Absalom looks and says, did Amnon do this to you? Right? So I just want to, like that's significant because it shows that David and Absalom have some similarities. They're both, they're on top of things, and they know people really well. Right? All Absalom has to do is see Tamar and say, what did Amnon do? And then... here David is. I mean, David really has every reason to be clueless, right? He probably gets cases like this all the time, right? People just constantly coming in. But something about this case, he's like, I don't think you're actually a widow. Like, this is like some Sherlock Holmes level stuff right here. He has no reason to doubt what this lady's doing, and she's been doing a really good job. But something about it, he's like, you know what? I don't think you're a widow. In fact, I think you're an actress. In fact, I think you were hired by somebody I know. In fact, I think it was my nephew. In fact, I think it was Joab. Like, it's like there's so many deductions that he just makes. Like, it's just funny. But, okay, sorry. The king answered the woman, do not hide from me anything I ask from you. And this is probably where she begins to sweat. Because he's like, I need your total honesty. She's literally been hired to be an actress. What more is an actress than a paid liar? Right? That's literally what you're doing when you're acting, right? You are being paid to live out something else. And he says, I need your unfiltered honesty. And he just gave her permission to speak bluntly, so she can't say no. Even if, I mean, he's the king, so she can't say no either way. And the woman said, let my lord the king speak, through stuttering lips. And the king said, is the hand of Joab with you in all of this? How do you think that he picked up on that?
Probably because it's kind of with his story. And he's trying to figure out himself.
Well, yeah, first off, there's that. We don't know how public the whole, like, the specific details about Absalom and David's relationship is. I mean, people probably realize there was a rift because, I mean, Absalom has been banished and he's not living in the land at all. So there's probably that. But, you know, she seems to know a lot more information than, you know, she probably should. It's kind of like one of those scenarios in the movie where, like, somebody says, you know, like, call somebody by name and they say, I never told you my name. It's like, okay, you had insider information somehow, right? I never mentioned that Absalom and I were not on speaking terms. Only person I told that to was Joab. Is Joab behind this? I don't know. We really don't know how this is. It could just be that David knows his nephew really well, and he probably knows his nephew's heart. And he probably looking at this, and he probably sees that Joab has really good intentions here, right? And he sees that Joab is trying to reconcile him with his son. And him and Joab have probably had conversations like this. Joab's probably like, David, like, can't you just forgive him? They probably had a lot of conversations like this to where finally he's like, I see what this is about. Gotcha. Yeah, this was Joab, wasn't it? So we don't know exactly how he figured it out, but I figured that that's probably the case. They probably had a lot of conversations, and Joab's finally like, fine, David, I won't bug you anymore. And then like a week later, this woman comes in, and she's like, this sounds a lot like your scenario, huh? And he's like, I get it. So he says, is Joab with you in all this? And the woman answers and says, as surely as you live, my lord the king, one cannot turn to the right hand or to the left from anything that the Lord my king has said. What is that a long, convoluted way of saying? Yes. She's like, you are a smart cookie. Yep. But she says it in the most complimentary and complicated way possible. Man, as surely as you live, king, there's no getting anything around you. You are smart. Yeah, Rocky?
If she didn't say specific things about David's story, she probably wouldn't have gotten caught.
Probably not, but then she would have failed her mission because the whole point was connecting her story to David's story. She like gets back to Joab. He never found out. He never found out? Yeah, I got away with it. I hired you to, yeah. But yeah, so she had to share the story, but it did show her hand. As surely as you live, my lord the king, one cannot turn to the right hand or to the left for anything my lord the king has said. It was your servant Joab who commanded me. It was he who put all the words in the mouth of your servant. So if you're mad at somebody, don't let it be me. I just work here. In order to change the course of things, your servant Joab did this. That's like such a dramatic statement. In order to change the course of things. It's like, in order to change the course of human history.
It's an actress.
It's very dramatic. But what is she saying? Like, I mean, she's being very complimentary towards Joab here, too. What is Joab's motive?
To fix things, to mend it.
Yeah, to fix things. But once again, she says this in a very complimentary and nice way, like you're speaking to a king. The translation, in rough terms, is that Joab thought you were being stupid and needed to do something smart. Right? And so basically she's saying, Joab thought that he could be a king better than you could be a king. That's really what she's saying. But she says it in a much gentler way. He did this in order to change the course of things. It was to help the kingdom out because he's such a good servant that he wants to help you out. Which is true, right? Joab is acting as a very good advisor right here. But whenever somebody gives you advice, you have to realize that the blunt way of saying that is that they think that they know what you need to do and you need to listen. Which doesn't typically go well with a king. But kings are supposed to have advisors. And so this is really positive. In order to change the course of things, your servant Joab did this. But my Lord has wisdom like the wisdom of a messenger of God to know all things that are on earth. She is real. This is where she's just kissing his butt at this point. She's like, but man, you're just so smart. Wow. You know everything. And I just find that really funny. So now, that's the end of that conversation with her, because you no longer need her to be the middleman, do you? Now, who's David going to go talk to? Joab, because that's who he really needs to communicate with. So, Sean, read the next paragraph for us. And once again, just read through verse 23.
23 or...
Just that one paragraph. Or no, 24, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Then the king said to Joab, Behold now, I grant this. Go, bring back the young man Absalom. And Joab fell on his face to the ground and paid homage and blessed the king. And Joab said, Today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, my lord the king, and that the king has granted the request of his servant. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, Let him dwell apart in his own house. He is not to come into my presence. So Absalom lived apart in his own house and did not come into the king's presence.
Okay. The story progresses. What do we see happen here?
You can come back. Just stay away from me.
Yeah. Absalom can come back. He just can't get near me.
Kind of missed the point.
It does miss the point entirely, doesn't it? This is what I'm saying with, like, everything David's done so far is good, but once again, we see David's a man. And to be fair to him, very complicated scenario. Do y'all think he handles this good or bad?
I mean, not very well.
Yeah, I think this is bad. I think that there are ways he could have handled this better. And I can guarantee you that David, later on in his life, probably thought that there were ways he could have handled this better as well. But yeah, this is just, it misses the point entirely, right? He goes through the motions of reconciliation, but he hasn't actually received his son back, has he? No. They're just closer to each other in proximity. And this is what I was talking about when it comes to application. We can learn a lot about forgiveness here. Because it's not enough to simply go through the motions of forgiveness, right? We actually have to forgive. It's not enough to just be like, you know what? I still hate you, but like, we'll just ignore it. No, you need to address the scenario. You need to address the situation. You need to work it out. You need to reconcile. Like, if Sean did something really bad against me, we could just ignore it and move on. And you could just choose to do that, right? Like, you can choose to, if I take that upon myself, but usually it's something that needs to be addressed. It needed to be addressed here. But so often in life, this is what happens, and then it gives rise to bitterness, which is what's going to happen with Absalom, and eventually the bitterness leads to a greater conflict, which is what's going to happen with Absalom. And so we can learn a lot of just about, like, human relationships right here. It's true to life, because it's a true story.
Yeah, it's almost like two kids, and it's like you tell the kid you need to apologize to him, and he's like, I'm fine, I'm sorry, but like, he's not actually sorry.
Well, and that's one issue. Like, I've had that with my junior hires, right? And we see this all the time with parents. Like, you'll say, no, go say you're sorry. And my biggest pet peeve is whenever parents are satisfied with just that. The kid's like, I'm sorry. And then it's like, okay, you taught your kid, you literally actually taught them the wrong lesson, right? Like, you literally have actually taught them the opposite of forgiveness. Like, no, like I've had my junior high kids do this, and they'll say they're sorry. I'm like, no, that's not going to cut it. Like, I'll stand here with y'all. If y'all need to talk something out, talk it out. Or y'all can both literally get over it right now and move on. But we're not just going to, like, just exchange empty words. And that's the issue. Like, a lot of parents...
and lie.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. We teach our kids the wrong thing, because we teach them all you have to do is say words, and that's what matters. No. Words mean literally nothing unless they're followed by intentionality, right? And so David is making a sign of it. Go get Absalom, come back. There's no reconciliation, though. That is not what God did with us, right? He laid his life down for us. He made it clear that he wants that relationship. It was not like he was like, okay, well, you know what, like, I guess if you, like, follow these rules.
He said,
you
come to me, all who are weary.
Yeah. Well, and the reason why he could say that, because whenever it says those who are weary and heavy laden, it's talking about people who are burdened by trying to follow the law. He says, come to me who are weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest. My yoke is easy. Because he says, I'm not going to demand you to make restitution to me. My burden is light. All you have to do is come to me, and I will give you that rest. That's the whole point.
Okay.
Right? It's not saying like, hey, you just like, no, he's inviting you because he's not making you, check off these boxes and I'll forgive you. He says, no. You want to know how I'm willing to forgive you? Watch me lay my life down for you. I will take your punishment upon myself to show you how willing I am to forgive you.
So when he says my burden is light, he's talking about the burden he would give us.
Yes, yeah, like the burden, like, yeah.
That was always a little confusing to me.
Yeah.
Like, why? I mean, it
Yeah.
kind of fits if he's talking about his own burden, but then I was like, well, I don't think his burden is light.
Yeah, because it's in contrast with the law.
Carrying the cross.
Right? Yeah, he says, like, yeah, the law is a burden too heavy to bear. Right? We cannot bear it. We cannot work our way back to God. But he says, my yoke is easy. My burden is light. Come to me. I'll give you that rest you're craving. Mm-hmm. David's not offering that to Absalom. He's just going through the motions, and he is leaving that heavy burden on Absalom. And there's nothing Absalom can do to fix this, right? The issue that makes this complicated again is that we're not going to see any initiative on Absalom's side where he wants to fix things, right? He wants to have things right with David, but he does not seem to have any repentance for what he did. That's the issue with Absalom, right? He doesn't seem to have any remorse. And to be fair, we can understand where Absalom's coming from, right? I mean, his sister, like, was violated by one of his brothers. Does that make it all right to murder your brother? No. But at least you can understand, like, he had more motive to do to Amnon what he did than what David did to Uriah. Right? Like, of the two, Absalom committed the lesser evil. That doesn't make it right, though. So the king said to Joab, behold now, I grant this, go bring back the young man Absalom. Even in how it's phrased, you can kind of just tell that it's like a, you caught me. Right? Okay.
Go ahead and get it.
Yeah. You did it. Your actress worked. She got the job done. Go get Absalom. Fine. Bring him back home. And once again, we read that his heart longed to be with Absalom, right? He's kind of, part of him, like, he's caught in this weird place where he does care for his son, but he can't forgive his son for what he's done. And that's probably because Absalom hasn't voiced any remorse, right? Absalom seems to think that he did what was right. And for David, that's a no-no. But it's also his son. And if anything, let me just explain what probably should have happened. David should have taken the initiative. He should have approached Absalom. They should have sat down and had a conversation. If they did that, that probably could have resolved all of this. Right? If he just sat down and said, Absalom, I need you to admit that what you did was wrong. And I need you to realize that. And if they had that conversation and he could get Absalom to admit that it was wrong, that would have made all of this better. The issue is that David seems unwilling to confront Absalom about it, which once again could go back to his sin with Bathsheba, because he probably realized that what Absalom did was wrong, but it's not nearly as bad as what he did. And so that's why I'm saying this whole thing is looming over him, because normally David would call people out on stuff like this. But David no longer has that perfect record. And now it seems like he's unable to confront his son, which is horrible. But that literally, one conversation would fix all of this. Because then Absalom would know that his father loves him, that his father cares for him, and that his father cares for him so much that he was willing to call him out on his mistake. But instead, the only message Absalom is receiving is that I made a mistake and my dad immediately threw me away. And even whenever he invited me back, it seemed more like a publicity stunt than anything else. And so David's not handling this well, Absalom's not handling it well, and so really we see that things are just building to a head. And Joab fell on his face to the ground and paid homage to bless the king. So Joab was just like, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And Joab said, today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, my lord the king, in that the king has granted the request of his servant. You can kind of tell that Joab's picking up on the fact that this is not David's desire, it is Joab's desire that David's granting. But Joab's willing to take his wins where he can. He's like, thank you, right? This is a start. Unfortunately, it's the start of the end. But it is a minor win. So Joab arose and went to Jeshurun and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. From an external perspective, everything looks like it's getting better. And the king said, let him dwell apart in his own house. He is not to come into my presence. So Absalom lived apart in his own house and did not come into the king's presence. All right. Talk about this from David's perspective and then Absalom's. What do you think David's thinking during all this? Why do you think that he's not willing to allow Absalom near him? He hasn't actually forgiven him, right? Which once again is sad, because the chapter began with David's heart longing to be with Absalom. And so we realize that it's not just David hating his son. He loves his son. We're going to see that especially later on in the book, and it's going to be too little too late. But David really loves Absalom. He's just incapable of moving past what Absalom did. Right? He is unwilling to, Absalom's sin against Amnon has become like the defining feature of Absalom to David. To where literally he just can't get past that. Which is problematic. And this will affect how we treat people too. Right? Because we have to realize that everybody has sinned and people are going to do some messed up stuff. But we have to be willing to go beyond that in how we interact with them. Because this is what's stopping David here. Right? It's like he's just getting rid of Absalom. This is horrible. This is not how a father should react to a son. A father should discipline the son. And David might think that this is some weird form of discipline. Because in a way, I guess it kind of is, but it really isn't. Right? Because what is Absalom learning from this? That's the question. Whenever you discipline your child, you have to ask, what are you teaching them? Right? It's not enough to simply spank your child. What are they learning from being spanked? Right? Are they learning, my parent loves me so much that they're spanking me right now? That's possible. Or are they learning, my parent just likes spanking me? Because the message will change the effect of the discipline. Right? There's a way where what David's doing could have had a positive effect. But it's not going to. Because from Absalom's perspective, he's not seeing any of the love of his father. This is not discipline. This is just abandonment in many ways. Right? Man, I did one thing and Dad just got rid of me. And then he invites me back and won't even look at me. I mean, yes, it is discipline, but it's not having the intended effect. So maybe you need to change your methods. But that's where David's thinking from, right? He invites Absalom back, but he still can't even stand face to face with him. This is the same David who mourned the death of Saul. The same David who mourned the death of Abner and Ishbosheth. The same David who invited Mephibosheth to come sit at his table. The same David who dined with Philistines. But he's not even willing to look at his own son. And he says, don't even step in my house. That one action, and once again, think about this. David knows what it's like to have his sin define his life. And he knows how horrifying and horrible that is. Yet he's doing the same thing to Absalom. And he's allowing one action to define it. To be fair, the difference is that David repented, Absalom has not. And so Absalom has kind of asked for this. But there is a point in our lives as Christians and as followers of God where we have to choose to take the first step. Even if the other person is not willing to do the right thing, we take the initiative. Right? And that's what David should have done. Right? It's not a matter of, I'm just waiting for him to repent. No, that's not what God did. God took the initiative. Right? We take the initiative. We do not wait for other people to do the right thing before we do the right thing. Right? That's where David's falling short here. That's really the key issue, is that he's not taking the initiative. He's reactionary. I was going to say let's look at Absalom's perspective, but I kind of addressed it there. Verses 25 through 27, Sean.
Now in all Israel there was no one so much to be praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head there was no blemish in him. And when he cut the hair of his head, for at the end of every year he used to cut it, when he was heavy on him he cut it, he weighed the hair of his head 200 shekels by the king's weight. There were born to Absalom 3 sons and 1 daughter whose name was Tamar. She was a beautiful woman.
All right. Cool. So this might seem like a very random thing to mention here, because we've already been talking about Absalom for a while. But let's just take a moment and step back real quick. We're all of a sudden talking about Absalom's hair and physical appearance. What does this sound like?
King Saul.
King Saul. Who else does it also kind of sound like? Samson too, that's true. But I'm thinking about it 1 and 2 Samuel.
When the 2 men got their beards shaved off?
No, not quite. The other person I'm actually thinking of is David. But not in the same ways, right? He shares more similarities to Saul than David for sure. And we're going to emphasize that in a second. But both Saul and David, how they were introduced, was specifically by, you read about their appearance and their hair. Right? Remember it talks about Saul being a head taller than all the men in Israel. And then with David it says that he was ruddy and beautiful. Right? So, and ruddy, people typically take it to mean that he had like auburn hair, which is kind of interesting. I think that's kind of weird. Just a fun fact about David, he might have had reddish hair. But, so both Saul and David were introduced by having their physical appearances described. What do Saul and David have in common? Both kings in Israel. So we've been reading about Absalom for a little bit, but all of a sudden at this point in the story, he is described by his physical appearance and stuff. What is the narrator subtly telling us?
He's the heir.
Not that he's going to be king or that he is the heir, but he wants to be. Right? This is where Simba starts singing that he just can't wait to be king. Right? This seems to be the final straw for Absalom. He's invited to live with Dad, but Dad will not forgive him or even see him, look him in the eyes. Now, Absalom is going to begin to plot what Saul thought David was going to do. Right? And Absalom is going to begin to plot a way to overtake David's throne. And so I think that's why it saves this detail for right now. Because if you've been reading the story, you know, it introduces Saul with his hair, and shortly after he becomes king. It introduces David in his hair, and all of a sudden, he's anointed by Samuel to be the future king. Now let's talk about Absalom and his hair. We know what follows afterwards, right? And so Absalom will be to David what Saul thought David was going to be to him, right? Which is really scary, right? Because Saul was super paranoid because of what David... Well, I mean, David wasn't doing anything, but Saul thought he was. David's not going to be paranoid, despite the fact that it's actually a legitimate reality. But it's going to be a really sad story. So, in all Israel, there was no one so much to be praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. Therefore, he's fit to be a king, right? No, not quite. No, he's murdered his brother, which is pretty horrible. So I don't think he's probably king material, but from a worldly perspective, absolutely. And if you think that the people back then are shallow, realize who have the most social media followers. Yeah, we're the same way nowadays, right? We don't just go follow ugly people usually. We naturally gravitate towards the beautiful, right? That's what we go chase after. And so it's not that they were shallow, it's that we're all shallow, including them, right? And so in all Israel, there was no one so much to be praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish. That's high praise, right? I mean, heck, every single one of us probably looks in the mirror and there's always something where we're like, yeah, that could be better. Not Absalom. Everybody looked at him and they're like, now that is a man. Think about the effect that Absalom... This is laying the groundwork for why he's going to be so influential. Right? Because, yeah, we're going to see he's not that great when it comes to character. But, man, is he an impressive figure. He's the one who walks in the room and you're like, yeah, that guy was homecoming king. You know, like that dude, 100%. This is the guy where as soon as he's standing on stage with the other presidential candidates, he might have the worst policies, but you're like, yeah, he's winning, for sure. Like, that's just how it's going to be. You know, there's a bunch of old, crusty white dudes, and then there's him. And he's just, like, tan and, like, beautiful, and you're like, yeah, he's winning. There's no chance. That's who Absalom is, right? He is this impressive figure. No blemish. Beautiful. So we know David was good-looking, and apparently his wife must have been good-looking, too. Apparently all of David's kids, because remember it said Tamar was really beautiful, too. And then this Tamar is also beautiful, right? So David had a bunch of good-looking kids. David has some good genes. I tried to think of a joke I can make about like Levi's or something, but there you go. David had good genes, and he wasn't even from the tribe of Levi. Okay, sorry. If you don't get the joke, I'm sorry. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. And when he cut the hair of his head, I love this little detail. For the end of every year, he used to cut it. When it was heavy on him, he cut it. Literally, he would have to cut his hair because it would just be like, oh my gosh. Like, it was just so heavy on his head. He weighed the hair of his head. Talk about cocky. I mean, this dude literally, like, he's like, hey, before you throw that hair away, like, oh, how much does that weigh? That's a lot of hair. That's impressive. Like, that came from me? Wow. They weighed it. It was 200 shekels by the king's weight. Do y'all know how much that is?
No.
Some of your translations might say, I think it's like 5.5 pounds or something. Yeah. 5 pounds of hair a year? That's a lot of hair. Like, that is crazy. Like, no wonder the dude's getting it cut off. He's just like walking around, and all of a sudden it's like, oh. Like, his like neck's probably hurting. And then all of a sudden he looks weird walking around with his like head all bent back, and they're like, oh, now he's got a blemish. So, he's like, cut it off. That's crazy. 5 pounds of hair? I wish. Cut off my hair. It's like an ounce. No, he weighed the hair of his head 200 shekels by the king's weight. So this guy, much like King Saul, had something significant about his head. Right? Saul was a head taller than everybody else, and he's got a head of hair. And his head. This is just a foreshadowing here. We might praise Absalom for his hair right now, but his hair is going to be his own undoing. Because eventually, just so you know where the story's heading, he's going to be on the run, and his hair's going to get caught in some trees, like tree branches. And he's literally going to be hanging there. It's going to be really embarrassing. So, this thing in which he prided himself will be his own undoing. It's literally pride coming before the fall. They were born to... This is actually really sweet. I like this. They were born to Absalom 3 sons and 1 daughter whose name was Tamar. He named her after his sister. Right? The sister that had been violated, who came to live in his house. That's really sweet. So we see that even though Absalom might not be the best guy, he's still got a little bit of David inside of him. Right? He still cares. And he cared deeply for his sister. And hence why he killed his brother, right? It's not like he was like, I can't wait to kill Amnon. He did it because he loved his sister so much. And we have to understand about Absalom, right? It's not like he's just an outright villain. He is villainous, but he had good motives. Does that make it right? No. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. But he's a guy who cares. There was born to Absalom 3 sons, 1 daughter, whose name was Tamar. She was a beautiful woman. Right? So much like in many ways, it's almost like he is giving his sister a future through his daughter. Right? Because his daughter is named Tamar, like his sister. His daughter is a beautiful woman, like his sister Tamar. So Amnon might have robbed his sister's life from her by violating her. But that life is almost like reborn through the daughter. It's actually very poetic and kind of sweet. But let's move to the end of this chapter. Sean, take it away.
So Absalom lived 2 full years in Jerusalem, without coming into the king's presence. Then Absalom sent for Joab, to send him to the king, but Joab would not come to him. And he sent a second time, but Joab would not come. Then he said to his servants, See, Joab's field is next to mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire. So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab arose and went to Absalom at his house and said to him, Why have your servants set my field on fire? Absalom answered Joab, Behold, I sent word to you, Come here that I may send you to the king, to ask, Why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me to be there still. Now therefore let me go into the presence of the king, and if there is guilt in me, let him put me to death. Then Joab went to the king and told him, and he summoned Absalom. So he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom.
All right. So, there's the partial resolution to that story. And when I say partial, I mean it's actually no resolution at all. Because things might look like they're fixed here, but they're not. At all. So, Absalom lived 2 full years. Starting with when Amnon forced himself upon Tamar. How many years have passed now?
4 and plus unknown.
What's that?
Is it
14? No, not 14.
5?
I believe it's 7. Am I
I think it's
wrong?
7, yeah.
It's 7, right? Because Amnon forced himself on Tamar, and then Absalom waited 2 years, and then invited Amnon to the party, and killed him. And then he went off for 3 years, right?
Okay.
And so that's 5, and then he comes back and is there for 2 years. Right? What's that?
I was thinking it was 10.
Oh, yeah.
And that's still strong.
Yeah, so 7 years have passed. Right there, 7 years. So Absalom lived 2 full years in Jerusalem without coming to the king's presence. And you can understand from Absalom's perspective, once again, we don't see any remorse in him. But this is not a good look for David. Right? I mean, Absalom probably feels very cheated here. Right? He had escaped, he was on his own, and then he hears that his father has invited him back home. He probably expects to be like the prodigal son. The difference is that the prodigal son was repentant, right? The prodigal son came back and his father ran out to him. Absalom did not do that. But at the very least, it seemed like David was trying to make things better. But really, he's only made things worse. Because Absalom is invited back home, and then his face is basically spat upon whenever he's told, you're living in a different house, you're not allowed to see the king. So now every day he's living in the same city as his dad, yet he's not allowed to see him. Which is probably more of a reminder of what stands between them. Right? At least whenever they were off on their own, they were living their own lives. Now they are literally just actively avoiding each other in the same city. So that you can, from Absalom's perspective, what's probably happening here?
He's probably frustrated and pissed.
Yeah.
Go back where he was. Pointless.
Yeah, he's just getting mad. He's like, why the heck am I here?
What's the point?
Yeah, what was the point of having me come here? Was it just to make yourself look better? What were you doing? And to be fair, he's correct. What was David's point? It seems like David just kind of got caught giving good advice to someone and then didn't follow through with it. Right? And, he told the woman, yeah, you should forgive him. And then the woman's like, why haven't you forgiven Absalom? And you're like, oh, crud. You're right. But David didn't follow through with it. He didn't actually forgive. And that's what I'm saying. That's the application. We need to learn how to forgive because David did not do it well here. And I don't know the correct answer other than just sitting down and talking about it. That's the issue. They haven't interacted. Right? Absalom did this thing and he fled. They haven't talked. David invites him back. They still haven't talked. Talk. Right? That is the solution. You cannot actually reconcile with somebody if you're unwilling to speak with them. Right? David hasn't done that. And so during this whole thing, 2 years have passed. And day after day, Absalom's like, why am I here? What's the point? Are you wanting to punish me or are you wanting to forgive me? Do something. At least talk with me.
And if anybody knows about him not being allowed to come into the king, his father's presence, I believe that'd be a great shame.
Yeah, it'd be embarrassing. Yeah, he's like one of the ones in line for the throne, yet the king won't even look at him. I mean, think about this. People probably know who sits at the king's table. Whenever the king has some public thing and they're going out to war, on their chariots, and Absalom's nowhere to be found. Everybody knows who Absalom is. He's literally the most beautiful man in Israel. It's not it's not like he's just some hermit hiding away in a rock. No. People know who Absalom is. He's popular. He's got this, he's one of those guys you can't not look at. And he's never around the king, even though they're supposed to be, they're related to one another. It's his son. Yeah, and so, 7 years have passed. There's just so much here. You can understand where Absalom's coming from, and you can understand where David's coming from, right? You have to look at both sides. And neither one's in the right, right? And that's just how things are going to be in life sometimes, right? Sometimes there's not a good guy and a bad guy. There are just two bad guys, both being bad. But both of them are also kind of good too, right? That's what I love about 1st and 2nd Samuel. There's so much complexity to it. So Absalom sent for Joab. Since he can't talk to David, he knows that at least Joab will talk to him, right? Apparently not. Then Absalom sent for Joab to send him to the king, but Joab would not come to him. So what's going on here?
He's mad because they never actually meet up.
Yes, but what do you think Joab's thinking here?
He's being loyal to David.
Yeah.
Thinks he's in trouble.
Yeah. It makes you wonder. I don't know exactly what Joab's thinking, but he tried his best, and he was really grateful for Absalom being there. But once Absalom's back and he sees that David's not interacting with him
For 2 years.
2 years, yeah, he's probably thinking do I want to push my luck any further? Maybe this Absalom guy's a lost cause. Maybe I need to turn my attention somewhere else. He's loyal to David, and so who knows? Maybe David's giving him commands. Don't talk to Absalom. I don't know. I don't know what Joab's position in this all is, but for some reason, Joab's had a change of heart. Right? In between the last interaction and this one, Joab's different. 2 years have passed. Maybe, I don't know, maybe Joab was just feeling especially compassionate one day and was like, let's fix this Absalom thing. And then now he's moved on. I have no idea.
It could be, the change could have immediately happened after. Maybe he thought once David realized what he should do that he would do it and do it completely. But once he saw that David just halfway did it, he was like, oh, okay, I'll just
That's true.
not mess with that anymore.
Yeah. Or it could be that maybe Joab, well, this actually is pretty in line with this character, maybe he's just content with outward appearance. Maybe his concern wasn't actually for David and Absalom's relationship. It was simply for the appearance and the effect that it had on the people of Israel. Well, they're back in the same city, so the kingdom's not torn apart yet. Maybe that's what he was thinking, you know? And maybe he was just being practical and pragmatic, and he wasn't actually caring for the hearts of the two men involved. He was more just thinking about the kingdom and trying to be like, oh, you know what? Whereas really, if you were caring about the kingdom, you would care about that. But man looks to the outward appearance, the Lord looks to the heart. Right? That's from 1 Samuel. I don't know. So there's plenty, we just listed 10 different motives Joab could have. I don't know. But for some reason, he's leaving Absalom on red. Right? He's just he's just going silent. So Absalom sent for Joab to send him to the king. He's trying to make him like the middleman. But Joab would not come to him. Joab just refuses. He's not interacting. And he said the second time, but Joab would not come. So it's not like Joab just was busy. No, there's something keeping Joab from doing this. Then he said to his servants, and this is where we really get to see Absalom's character. Then he said to his servants, see, Joab's field is next to mine, and he has barley there. Go set it on fire. Right off the bat, what does this tell us about Absalom?
He doesn't get what he wants. He'll seek revenge.
Yeah, this is not a good dude, right? And now all of a sudden you might be on David's side again. For a while you're feeling bad for poor Absalom. Yeah, he made a mistake, but you know what? He was doing it to defend his sister's honor, and now he's just being rejected by his dad. Oh no, now you're like, I think I get why David didn't forgive his son. This dude is trash, right? You go back and forth. He's like, hey, Joab won't talk to me. Okay, so what do you want to do about it? Burn down his field. It's like, whoa, slow down. Maybe send a third time? Or maybe instead of sending a messenger, maybe you go talk to him. Maybe rather than asking Joab to come to you, go to him. Right? There's so many other alternatives to this verse. Right? You don't have to commit arson. You don't have to burn something down. But
And his
to
field-
go. Oh, sorry. Was that?
His field. I like to mention the way the culture is at those times, because it lets you know the weight, the full weight, and because they in those times everything was the basics like honor and now it's a lot more complicated. You burn somebody's field, that's part of their income.
Yeah.
Their life.
I mean, heck, I would be ticked if you burned down my front yard, but I don't need that grass, right? This is an agrarian society, right? You burn down my field, that's my income, right? That is how I make a living. That is how I feed my family. Also, you have personally shamed me. This was an attack. And also, just a reminder about a principle that we've adopted in this Bible study group. What do we say about Joab?
Don't mess with him.
You don't mess with Joab. What did Absalom just do?
Mess with Joab.
Who do you think is going to ultimately kill Absalom?
Joab.
There you go. That's why I say don't mess with Joab. Yeah.
You get the
Exactly. Yeah, Joab's the original bull. Mess with the bull, you get the horns. Yes. So Absalom, this is bad. This is really, really bad. But this is where we get to see his true colors. And you get to see, maybe David had a reason for distancing himself from this guy. But also, once again, who does this sound like? Y'all mentioned him earlier. Samson, right? Samson, the man with long hair. Samson, the man who burned down a field. How Samson did it was with foxes. Remember that? Yeah. Samson was just wild. Samson was just a crazy dude. Samson's literally I'm going to tie, Samson was just weird. I don't know why he would do this, but he's I'm going to take foxes and tie them together and set them on fire. It's why not just set the field on fire? He's that's too easy. Samson he's just dramatic. I don't know. So, so Absalom says to his servants, see, Joab's field is next to mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire. But notice how he's not doing anything for himself, right? He's sending he's like an entitled prince, right? He sends servants to go do things. Go contact Joab. Oh, Joab doesn't want to come to me? Fine. Go to him, right? Like, do your own thing. Like, everything Absalom is doing is through other people. He's not willing to do anything himself. He is literally just... He didn't even kill Amnon himself. Do you remember that? He had servants kill Amnon. He just set in motion things. He's not willing to get his own hands dirty, right? He is simply the entitled prince eating grapes and being fanned by palm branches while he lets everybody do his dirty work. So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Well, I guess they're obedient. That's good. Then Joab rose and went to Absalom. And he was like, what the heck, man? I mean, I was just busy for a few days. I'm sorry.
It's a reasonable question.
Yeah. It's a very reasonable question. Then Joab arose and went to Absalom at his house and said to him, why have your servants set my field on fire? So I love that Absalom didn't even make this a secret. Like, it's like he probably like had them like light it in like a, like it literally said, Absalom did this or something in the field. Like,
Absalom was here.
yeah, Absalom was here, WUZ or something.
It's also funny that Joab goes to him himself versus Absalom.
No, exactly, right? Joab, like, he's not sending a servant. Joab literally just like comes knocking on Absalom's door. He's like, dude, what the heck? Like, I got you back to Jerusalem, and you set my field on fire? Like, what is this? Absalom answered Joab, behold, I sent word to you. No apology, right? Notice, like, that's what I'm saying. You have to notice Absalom's character. He does not apologize. He does not repent. He seems like, he acts like this is a totally reasonable thing to do. He's like, oh, I didn't get what I wanted. Therefore, you lose your field. That's how this works. Behold, I sent word to you, come here that I may send you to the king. He's like, he was acting like a king, right? He said, so this is a prince talking to the commander-in-chief of all Israel, saying, I told you to come here, and you didn't come here. I'm sorry, I answered to your father, not to you, little child. Right? Like, that's the thing. But he's not talking like a prince. He's not talking like an exiled son. He is talking like somebody who the whole world should bow down to.
Besides, think about what would happen
Right.
if he was king.
Exactly. It's dangerous. Yeah. Behold, I sent word to you. Come here that I may send you to the king, to ask, why have I come from Jeshurun? It would be better for me to be there still. Now therefore, let me go into the presence of the king, and if there is guilt in me, let him put me to death. He's just snobby. He's like, what? I set your field on fire because you didn't answer my call. Like, this is like... Yeah, this is like somebody like not answering a text, and so you go like steal their car and drive it off a bridge. It's like, what? There were so many other steps you could have taken. And then he's like, what? You didn't answer me. Okay, well, what did you want me to do? I want you to get me an audience before the king. And if he's done with me, then he can just kill me. It's like,
Boyfriend and girlfriend in high school.
yeah, dude. Like, yeah, basically. No, it's like dramatic much? Like, come on. But to be fair, David could have Absalom killed, right? Because that really is kind of the lingering thing here, and you do have to empathize with Absalom, because he has been brought back to Jerusalem, but he doesn't know whether his dad wants to kill him or forgive him. And it seems like his dad doesn't want to do either. His dad just wants to let him be, right? You have your side of the city, I have my side. And so Absalom, to his credit, I mean, he has weird ways of doing it, but he is at least trying to get an answer. That's more than David's doing, right? David was more than happy to just leave it, like, ambiguous. And Absalom's like, I want to know where we are. This is like the DTR, define the relationship, right? He's like, what are we? Are we father and son? Are we enemies? Like, are we good? Do you want to kill me? Like, let's just get this over with. I'm done waiting, right? And I will burn down fields if I've got to get it done. I do think it's kind of funny. Charles Spurgeon has like a quote where he takes this and he says that this is sometimes what God has to do to us. Sometimes he has to burn down our fields just to get our attention. Which is true, right? I mean, it's probably not the application to take from this, but I find that really hilarious. Like, yeah, because it seems really blown out of proportion. It's like, you didn't answer my call, so I burned down your field. That's what God has to do to us sometimes. It's like, we're not listening to him, so he just like smacks us to the ground and kicks us, and it's like, okay, now I got your attention. It's about time. That's what Absalom did. Then Joab went to the king and told him, and he summoned Absalom. Joab's probably like, dude, I was staying out of this, right? I was the middleman once, did not want to do it again, but my field was burned down. You need to talk to your son, right? And so it happens, right? He summons Absalom in. So Absalom comes to the king, and he bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. And they lived happily ever after the end. Question mark? Big question mark. yeah, this is not the end of the story. It looks like it would be a very good end, wouldn't it? I mean, here you have Absalom prostrating himself down, fully just humbly presenting himself before the king. And then you have David kissing his son, which should be a sign of forgiveness. But really, both of them do not mean what they're doing, right? Absalom is bowing down, but he is really wishing that he could stand high above David, right? So he might be in a posture of humility, but he has already chosen to follow the path of the dark side.
It's kind of like Thor and Loki, a little bit.
In many ways, yeah.
Loki wants what Thor has.
Yeah. No, it is a lot like that. And so Absalom presents himself humbly, but he's already planning a rebellion. David presents himself as forgiving his son, but really he's still just going through the motions because there's something within David that it just won't cross that gap. Like he can't get himself to do it. Which really they should just talk. Like once again, like literally just talk about it. Like get your son up, and rather than having him bow before you, pull up a chair right next to you, and just duke it out. Talk. Right? It's probably gonna get heated, but at least you'll have a conversation and y'all will be better off by the end. What David's doing here, he's just avoiding, right? He's just avoiding the situation, maybe out of his own guilt, maybe out of his own animosity. I don't know what's keeping David from it here, but it's really sad. Because, I mean, we see this in the world all around us, right? So many people whose relationships are just fractured because they're not willing to actually talk, and they're afraid of the conflict. David has never been a person who's afraid of conflict in the past, but after that David and Bathsheba thing, he just seems really afraid of it. So, there's chapter 14. We will be in chapter 15 next week, and we will see the seeds of rebellion planted, because all things are not good in the neighborhood for David. It's going to get worse. Do y'all have anything y'all want to add before we pray? All right. One of y'all want to pray for us? Somebody who didn't pray at the beginning. Finnevere McBride, go for it.
Lord, we thank you for this evening, that we can gather together and study your word, the history of your chosen people. Lord, we pray that we've learned much from studying this chapter, and whatever is applicable, that we apply it to our lives, and that we remember the history of our Savior, Jesus Christ, and we keep him at the center of our lives at all times, glorifying you always. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.